Hello, welcome back to Story Time. I have freshened up my coffee, and cheers to you and whatever warm drink you have. As where I live, we move into cold weather and very spooky season. It's nice to have some hot liquids and some sensory solutions, big, crinkly, comfy blankets. The more fleece, the better. And maybe story time can help us feel better about the world. And I always hope that watching a little hero move through trauma can help us move through trauma. I hope that you have cozy pets or blankets to snuggle. Instead of just hearing my dog sigh and thump her tail, I wonder if we could also see her. Bailey, can you come over here? Come here. Can you come be in sight? Hi, come here. Come here. Come here. Come here so I look less crazy. Hi, come here. Come on, all the way over. She's trying really hard to not get up. Okay. Spilling coffee. This is Bailey. I hope that you have some creature or stuffed creature that you can snuggle for story time. Maybe one who is willing to get up and snuggle you instead of just make you look crazy with noises off to the side. And then look at you and make you feel guilty for not petting her more. But this is story time, so you can join us for story time. But it's not going to be a show just about you because you're scared of cameras. I'm sorry I publicly shamed you about your fear of cameras. Because I love when people read to me, and we're all in a tough spot in the world, I think we all need more story time in our lives, and the words that I am free to give away to you are from Ophelia Immune, a book that I wrote, so I can violate the copyright all I want. I guess I could have just made an audiobook, but I want to sigh as big as my dog and say that I don't have the time and patience and energy to learn how to do that for you. In fact, I only have the time and patience and energy to give you 2 chapters of story time today. And I didn't put numbers on my chapters like a fool, so this is maybe the last time I will be able to track and say to you that we'll pick up today Chapter 2 of Ophelia Immune, The House. Our new house froze me in its glare as it slouched around the last curve of our new, long gravel road. 2 stories of wooden shingles hunkered over a rickety front porch that pulled the whole shack forward. There were certainly zombies inside, stuffed into closets, smearing themselves across the abandoned floors, their pocked rubber skin collecting the dusty glass that they had broken and dragged inside with them. I could see 2 floors full of wide open, unpadded rooms that made my palms sweat, even from my seat. We all had little accidents in the car, hangnails or knocked heads or cramped ankles, but the accidents that we could have inside of the house would be so much bigger. The door that I could see had no bars or fences or even locks. Nothing's as soft and padded as the back seat or as forgiving as the familiar dirt of a campsite. How long would it be before Hector or Juliet or I would fall and break a bone on those hard wooden floors? Would it be a wrist or a knee? I was 15 and I could probably handle it. They were only 5 and 4. Could I protect them in the wide open spaces? No. A short, uneven porch sloped before the front door, which opened without creaking because Dad was already out there greasing it as his first chore. He was always thinking and working. Mom was stretching in the long grass of the yard, her hands on her toes, but her head tilted, her eyes always searching for something that would stumble and lurch at us. After she peered over each cardinal direction, she waved at me to go ahead and bring the kids out. I couldn't swallow around my fat tongue. Zombies were everywhere. They could be everywhere, anywhere, every day, all the time. They were in the thickets and brambles to each side of our new gravel driveway. I'm sure of it. They will hide behind the old wooden shed perched at the top of the yard, vast and weedy. A horde of zombies could easily clamber up over that little hill to the south that I can't see behind. There, Dad pointed with the tip of his oil can. There's a little stream flowing down below that hill. I could almost see the scaly fish swarming around the swollen ankles of a staggering ex-human. Cold sweat trickled down my back when I sat up higher to scan beyond the fences of the overgrown garden in the east, searching for anything swaying beyond the green, but not a plant. Mom and Dad left us in the car, opened the front doors of our new house, and stepped inside of that thin wooden frame, their axe and crowbar raised high. They disappeared into the mouth of the huge house, completely out of sight. It swallowed them whole. I clenched Juliet's hand and strained to hear every breath that Hector took, so that I wouldn't have to focus on my own. Imogen's ghost whispered warnings to me. Sweat dripped from my chin down the collar of my ratty flannel. I buried my nose in the dirty denim stretched across my folded knees. Bells and emergency whistles pounded inside of my head while I counted the number of seconds until a zombie pawed at our window to pull one of us out backwards and screaming. Minutes passed. Footsteps crunched on the gravel outside of the car. Dad reached for the handle to open it. I shook my head wildly and pressed my fingers down on the lock button as hard as I could. Hector whooped like a monkey to get out and go play, thinking this was a safe campsite. Juliet sat quietly on her haunches, waiting to see what would happen next, until Mom opened the other back door and scooped my little sister out into in her arms. "No!" I shouted. I scrambled to pull Juliet back in by her shirt. Hector scrambled into the front seat for his own escape into the great wilderness. I tried to keep my foot pressed against the lock button on my side, but I slipped, and Dad cracked my door open. It opened only a tiny sliver, while Dad reached down to get a good hold on Hector, who was trying to crawl away crab-style along the gravel. But it was enough for Imogen's ghost to leak away. She drifted loose and free, a tiny puff of steam in the wind. First, the top of her head and face faded, smiling at me as she disappeared, whipped into peaks. Her neck stretched and craned to follow the breeze, and then her slight shoulders, chest, belly, and neatly folded hands. She drifted up and away into the summer blue, finally just a glimmer against my cool yellow sun. I tried to grab at her feet, but she was weightless and far out of my reach. I landed in the gravel on my hands and knees. "My goodness, Ophelia!" Mom crouched next to my level, and Dad knelt over me, nearly toppling backwards, with Hector squirming on top of him. "What are you doing? The house is great. You're going to love it. Come and see." He didn't know that we had just lost Imogen for good. How could she leave me now? I gripped a fistful of dirty pebbles and flung them back at the ground, jamming as much dirt under my nails as I possibly could. "Really, Ophelia?" Mom said as she passed me, toting Juliet into the new house. "Act your age. Be a young lady. You're 15, not 5. 15? Am I that old? I was 6 when Imogen died. 9 years ago. 9 years I had her ghost, all in the car. No more." They left me standing there by myself, by our safe car. I couldn't remember the apartment that we had lived in before the monsters had come, nor the preschool teacher who had called me off of the playground to get into my parents' car with my older sister already buckled in, the trunk full, barely enough space left for 2 little butts next to the cooler and a box full of tools. That was my home. All of our food and clothes and tools were in the car, all the way until now. But Mom and Dad just walked away, like they had never needed the dented red egg, like they didn't have anything left to keep them safe. A twig snapped behind me. I whirled on all fours to see what it was. It was a squirrel, darting from tree to tree. I picked up my hammer and ran to be nearer to Dad's axe. If I couldn't stop them from moving on, at least I could go and die in the house with them, swinging all together. "Come on in," Mom said. "See our new home, Ophelia." She forced the little piles of dust and scraps across the wooden floor with harsh strokes. The floor was nearly level, but dirtier than the hard-packed mug of campsite ground. As Hector scooted his bottom across the floor, he gathered loose soot and rodent droppings with his pants. I forced myself 10 paces past the threshold and scooped him into my arms to clean him off. His knobby knees clattered against my ribs and forearms. His wet thumb grazed my ears and neck, giving me the chills. He had been just starting to improve in the campsites. Would he ever learn how to speak in this harsh, flimsy tinderbox, or would he forever coo like a drunken pigeon? 5 is too old not to be talking. Maybe this cabin would be good for him. I held him up by his armpits, forcing his scrawny legs to extend and walk instead of crawl. Juliet met us at the back door, directly across the plain rectangle room from the front door. "Window," she said, smiling up at me. "Mine." The glass was unbroken, smudged and cluttered around the sills with dead flies, but not shattered, not caved in or bashed or otherwise clawed at, just empty panes of glass standing around our living room in 3 pairs. So much unbroken glass in one place. They would cut themselves when they finally broke it. Juliet and Hector applied their fingers and nose prints against the panes, marking their territory. Hector's dusty crown of fluff bobbed just above Juliet's neat brown twists. How was it possible that she was only a year younger than him? Juliet was walking, talking, making eye contact, but she was still very small. Maybe if they had grown up with enough food, they might not be such runts, like me. I'm 15, but I still look like I'm 11, more shrunken than even Mom's ballerina jeans can explain. I'm very knobby, and I stoop a bit. There isn't much space to grow in the back seat, not a lot of places to store food, no steady jobs to get money and buy more food. Maybe this house and land will be good for some things. "Flutterbys," Juliet crooned, and Hector hummed. "No, those are moths," I said. They pointed and jostled to see the insects fleeing from the earthquakes of their tapping hands. There was another porch off the back door, bigger and clear except for stray sticks and leaves. There was a view of the tall tangles and vines that used to be a garden. A tan and white bunny hopped tentatively out of the weeds and looked over its shoulder before nibbling on a thistle. The bunny didn't seem concerned. It could have run fast enough to escape anything that came after its way. The cobwebs and rodent droppings that Mom cleaned away through the open doors told me that the house had been empty for a long time. There had been no living food inside to tempt the zombies in here. No human smells or noises or sounds or anything that they would have wanted to eat. Just skittering pests and a faded poster of pheasants taking flight, tacked crookedly to the rough board wall. Now that we had arrived, though, we would call the monsters to us like a trumpet, all of our noises and smells bellowing out to them. We couldn't run or hide as well as a bunny. "It was probably just a hunting cabin," Dad said, tugging on a ratty curtain covering in antler patterns. "Or a bachelor pad. They didn't leave much behind, did they?" There was an enormous kitchen with a view north up the driveway over an empty sink with no pump handle. The kitchen door was wide enough that 2 of me could have laid down across the speckled vinyl. It was wide open without a 4th wall between it and this plain living room. An empty, upright white box with a heavy door loomed big and tall, just like the miniature ones that some of the rangers used to use to store food next to their generators, cold enough to hurt your teeth. A two-burner stove gaped with its well-cleaned, sootless mouth, missing a chimney. 6 cabinets, 3 drawers, and 1 shallow closet were more shelf space than we could ever fill with all of our belongings. A small wooden chair was left over that hadn't been burned for fuel, but a mouse had stolen the padded seat and nested in it beside the door to the indoor latrine. Wow, I let the white porcelain call to me from across the room. The latrine drawer was propped diagonally, hanging from one unrusted bottom hinge, exposing a squat toilet without any cracks. The seat was almost aligned with the bowl, and the lid was still squarely on top of the tank. But it barely held a rusty puddle of water, and there was no pit beneath it to catch all of our waste. I wondered where the working outside latrine was. How far would I have to walk now through the weeds to get eaten while just trying to pee? "No, watch this," Dad said, grinning and picking up a full bucket of almost transparent water. "There are some old rain barrels outside. See what happens when I pour in the water?" He tilted the dented aluminum pail sideways and let the barely orange water slide away into the toilet. It rushed in a spiral until it became a tornado. Without flipping any latches or pulling any releases, the water filled up to the top of the bowl and then gurgled away with a little clink when it was finished. Around the side of the porcelain pot, a simple metal pipe disappeared into the wall. "Where does it go?" I asked. I hadn't seen a sloppy shithole poking out of the external siding. "There's a septic tank buried out back," Dad smiled. "Septic tank?" I asked, my nose wrinkled. "It's buried in the ground. You'll never smell it. I'll show you the lid later." Dad patted the top of my head, happy as could be. Hector squealed with delight and propelled himself across the floor on his bottom in one hand. He pulled on Mom's skirts to come see the miracle toilet, but she had already seen it and was busy retying Juliet's mismatched shoelaces. "Oh, Hector," she sighed. "I could use some time to set up dinner on the Bunsen burner if we're going to eat before dark rolls in. Why don't the 4 of you go explore upstairs?" "Let's go!" Dad pumped his fist in the air. He beamed widely and only managed to clap his hands once before Juliet launched herself into his arms. Hector scuttled for the stairs, but Dad held him up by the back straps of his filthy overalls. I crossed my fingers and toes as I crept cautiously behind him to the staircase beside the front door. "Ophelia, you go first," he suggested. "It'll be good practice. Do you have your hammer, little bean?" I nodded slowly yes to the hammer, and then no to the stairs. But his warm fingers on my back propelled me forward, the chipped blue handle of my hammer sweating in my palm. "Nice and easy," he said. "We're just going to check it out." Dark green curtains flapped at me from the window that Mom had opened for fresh air halfway up the stairs. They were hardly tattered or stained, almost like new. They coated my fingertips in dust that I used to trace the sharp outlines of the pine trees that towered over our driveway. We live in a forest of green teeth now. At least we'll have plenty of firewood. Firewood was hard to find in the campgrounds. The first 5 stairs did not squeak under the toes sticking out of the ends of my tennis shoes, but the 6th stair groaned when I put my weight on it. I winced. Something upstairs shuffled across the floor. Probably just a mouse. Or a rat. At least those have some edible meat on their bones. The biggest ones, anyway. Or a raccoon. If we could catch it, we could have a decent dinner. I thought of Mom with a propane stove warming the pans downstairs. I licked my lips and tiptoed over the 12th stair into the hallway. It was probably just a small animal that we could catch and eat. Probably. There were 5 suspicious doorways, 2 on each side and 1 at the end of the hall. So many rooms, so many places for creatures to hide, some that I could eat, some that would eat me. I prayed for chipmunks and ferrets. Not all families are as brave as us. It was brave of Dad to drive his axe through Imogen's head when she was bitten. It would have been brave of him to drive one through my head, too, if I had been foolish enough to try and stumble away with my sister. It would have been unkind to let us wander off together to decay in unison. We wouldn't have been ourselves. We would have chased people, eaten them if we could, hurt them. We would have destroyed other people's families just because Dad hadn't had the courage to immediately drop a sharp blade through the tiny skull that he had once held in the palm of his hand, damp with amniotic juice, his firstborn, my big sister. Not all families are that brave. Some people let their loved ones suffer to the end, all the way through the bloody lungs, the vomiting, and the seizures. Once they paused to give the bitten a goodbye hug, they lost all of their momentum, and when the infected finally died and looked at peace after all of the gray-faced, pneumoniac rattling, it was tempting to take a long series of moments to hold their hands, stroke their cheeks, whisper them sweet nothings for just a few minutes more. Even when they sat up and gurgled with cold limbs and green cheeks, that beast still looked familiar. The ex-human didn't have many wounds yet. How could a mother drive a pike through her darlings' yet unscathed temples? Some would rather die. Some did. Some would rather lock them in a closet and leave them there until they looked like nightmares. So I would have to check all of our new closets for people's abandoned dreams. Make sure that they're all empty. Make sure that they're all safe. Or let our family get destroyed just like theirs. The fifth room at the end of the hall was itself a big closet, and I only had to take a couple of tiptoes to see that it was empty aside from a three-legged stool draped with cobwebs. The first room to my right was old butter yellow, with stale with matching curtains, and its right closet door wide open with nothing to hide. An easy pass. Dad herded Juliet and Hector into the empty butter room to wait while I checked the other three. The second room on the right was huge, a nice campsite cage size, big enough for a compact hatchback to fit in, with a little space remaining on the sides. The walls were paled emerald color of duckweed in July. A single golden drape hung from the rod above the window all the way to the floor, drifting in little tumbleweeds that we hadn't swept yet, with nothing but spiders hidden behind it. The double closet space had no doors, just empty shelves, nothing to creak or conceal. I turned my back to the empty green room to peer across the hall. A floorboard yelled and groaned when I pressed on it to cross to the other side. I memorized it, flattening myself against the creamy hallway paint, willing my lungs to stop sprinting away without me. It was time to look into the next room. My nose and my lips went first, the rest of my face gingerly clearing the sight of another wide-open closet and a room covered with floral wallpaper. A tiny chest of drawers hunkered in the corner, not big enough to hold a dangerous body. My diaphragm begged me to breathe more deeply. I didn't dare pant as loudly as I wanted to as I entered the room. The corners of my mouth stuck shut with their own paste. There was only one place left to check, just one room left to go. Make it clear. Be sure. Be safe. Take care of it. Juliet and Hector stood on their tiptoes behind me, peering out of the old butter room, waiting to see what I would find. Dad stood ready in the background, anxious to see how I performed, if my furrowed brow was as thoughtful as his, if my aim with my hammer was as true. The walls were baby blue, as pale and as calm as the soft clouds outside, just like my hammer. The checkered gingham shades were cast open to let sunlight in, but the closet door, which was badly fitted into its frame, was wedged closed. The brass doorknob was crooked, but somehow still holding it shut by the tip of its latch. I wheezed and curled my toes as far into my shoes as they would fit. Where had the rat that I had heard gone? Had it been a rat? What was that scuttling? Who made that noise? Go ahead and check the closet. Dad eased me forward with a hand on my lower back. Just like we've talked about. We've practiced for this. I inched closer to the doorknob and reached out my fingers, shaking. I closed my eyes and thought about what Dad had told me. It's not a real person anymore. It's not human. Aim at its temple with the broad end of the hammer or the top of its head with the sharp, hooked side. Swing hard. Swing again. Don't stop. Unless there's another one. Then knock the first one down as well as you can, but go after the second as well. If there are 3, keep moving back as you swing. Dispatch them one at a time. After all 3 are down, finish them off and dispose of the remains. Don't get blood on you. Wear gloves if you can. If there are 4, oh gods, where are my gloves? I have gloves, but I'm not wearing them. No gloves. I backed away from the closet door, shaking my head. Okay, little bean, it's all right. Let me show you. Dad took my hammer, leaving me to guard Hector and Juliet empty-handed. He walked firmly to the closet door, twisted the knob, swung it open with my hammer held high above his head. The door flew open and Dad peered inside. Nothing. It was empty. I breathed. Juliet and Hector chased each other down the hallway, squealing and bumping into the walls, grabbing at the dust mites floating in the sunbeams. Here you go. All safe, little bean. Dad pinched my cheek with his warm fingers. I think we're all going to sleep in that big green duckweed room. We'll carry all of the blankets in there and spend the night all together, just like in the car. But maybe during the day, sometimes, this could be your room? My room? Sure, Dad thumbed his jawline. Everybody needs a little bit of space on their own. You're 15 now, almost 16, practically an adult. I thought you might enjoy some space. I bit my lip. What would I do with it? Hide alone and listen to everybody else getting eaten? I was scared of falling on that huge flat floor that was much bigger than a back seat. I could skin my knees. The little kids could break their legs. Wouldn't it be nice to stretch out? Dad asked, without anybody else's elbow in your ribs? The elbows aren't so bad. Bean. He cut my chin. Isn't your favorite color blue? Look at this paint. It matches your hammer. I think it should be for you. Okay, I said, not yet swallowing. He went on. But it comes with responsibility, Ophelia. This whole farm does. I'm going to need your help. This farm is going to be hard work, really hard work. We'll be lucky if we make it. I nodded solemnly. Finally, he was making sense. But we can do it if we all work together. You're not a little girl anymore, Ophelia. It's time for you to learn how to take care of yourself and the family, like I ever do anything else. There are no cages here, but you can't be afraid all the time. I looked at my feet. How did he know? I tried to be so careful. While I am away working, or even just looking the other way, you are going to have to help your mother watch the kids and defend the farm. Yes, I said, nodding furiously, itching to run down the hallway and see what the kids were getting into now. I will teach you how to live out of cages. I will show you how to chop wood and kill zombies. It's going to be hard work, but work that I think you are ready for. I am, but the cages were much better for... No. He cut me off. We're done with cages. My palms grew sweaty. Should I accept this big, empty room greedily, happy to have space, pretending to be permanent and safe? Should I fall on my knees and beg to remain small forever, claiming not to be brave? If I begged, would he take us back to a campsite? Should I go to a campsite by myself with the kids until Mom and Dad come to their senses? Would my spine ever straighten from the curve of the back seat? Could I keep us safe long enough? Could I swing my hammer hard enough to save Hector or Juliet just because Dad asks me to? I'll try, I whisper, my mouth dry. Good. Dad beams again. I have a special gift for you, a gift only for 15-year-olds. He pulled a used but polished blue axe with a leather blade guard out of the back of his suspenders and placed it across my palms. My jaw hung open like I had died. An axe? For me? He stooped to kiss my head just as Hector stumbled past and grazed his knee on the cracks between the floorboards, just as I had feared. He wailed big tears. But it was just a tiny scratch. Juliet blew him kisses, and Dad scooped them up, one under each arm, and turned to take them downstairs. Go ahead, he said. Stay up here in your room. Make yourself at home. Am I home? Did I want to stay by myself and watch him walk away, afraid that I would refuse my new gifts and follow him? Dad smiled gently and closed the door behind him. I heard his feet on the stairs, and Hector's feet kicked up the wall as they descended. Surely my dad could keep them safe for just a few minutes while I tested myself, while I showed him that I wasn't so scared. Slowly, I felt each plank of the floor with hard pressure from my foot, from the door to the window and back again. Most of the boards squeaked, but only lightly, nothing loud enough to be heard from outside of a house. They were smooth in most places, thinly varnished, but not likely to cause splinters on bare feet unless you really kicked at them. I removed my sneakers to feel the real wooden boards on my soles, disbelieving that they hadn't been pried up and burned as fuel. This whole house could practically be burned as fuel. Maybe we'd need to during the winter and end up back in the car anyway. I wiggled my toes at the spackled white ceiling. It was so clean and tall. I would need a ladder to reach it if I wanted to hang a stick and leaf mobile for Hector and Juliet, if Dad had any brass hooks to spare, or I could make some out of old barbed wire. I fingered the blue and white curtains that hung limp around my 4 very own squares of unbroken glass. I tested their shimmering surface with my fingertips before forcing the slightly tarnished lock. The window opened unevenly from seasonal swelling. When I pushed it further, it popped wide to let in the warm breeze. A few white paint chips floated onto my feet. If I closed my eyes, it wasn't completely unlike standing safely in the middle of a campsite cage. Sturdy substances all around me. Spaces that I can invite my loved ones into. I paced into my very own empty closet and shut the door. I didn't like the squeak of its hinges, and I would need to fix them. But the knob latched and held solid, tiny cracks of light peering around its crooked frame. Once my ears adjusted to the quiet noise level, I could block out the thuds of Hector and Juliet's feet across the floors downstairs and focus on the sounds outside. The trunk unlatching, Dad's heavy footsteps in the gravel, his arms wrapping around crinkling tarps to carry our supplies in from the car, the click of the front door, the tiny bang as it slammed shut behind him. Nobody was screaming. The narrow boards were not as comfortable as the soft upholstery of the car, but now there was a whole floor of the house, full of my parents, between me and the outside world, plus a staircase and 2 closed doors. The dark was quiet and completely free of teeth that didn't belong to me. I was safe, but only I was safe. I had no way of knowing that everyone else was safe. What if they all got eaten while I was hiding in my very own space, and I had to listen? I would never sit by while that happened. I would leap out with my hammer held high. If they got eaten, I would cast myself among them. I would not go alone. I would not make my Imogen mistake twice. It wasn't a mistake, I reminded myself. It hadn't been her anymore. Once it was bitten, it wasn't a human anymore, and it didn't matter who crushed its skull anymore. All that mattered was who was left behind, and that was me. I was left behind, right here, in my very own closet. My heart hammered in my ears. My tongue grew to 10 times its usual size. I felt my throat gurgle, but I couldn't hear it because my ears were full of cotton. I clenched my hands open and shut, and tried to breathe in and out, sucking air through my teeth. I dropped my axe, fumbled to untangle my hammer from my belt loops. It was warm and solid where I pressed it against my forehead, the smooth shellacked handle tacky against my lips. In and out. I would keep breathing. I opened my eyes slowly when the ocean between my ears calmed. My knuckles were white and dry on the handle of my hammer where I was strangling it. I released my grip with a smack and set it to examine my new gift, an axe that I could use to keep my family even safer. Slim and long-handled, almost the same shade of used blue as my hammer, a worn leather pouch wrapped tightly around the blade, keeping the cutting edge away from accidental fingers. The thick snaps tinged open firmly under my dirty fingernails, the metal curve sharpened and polished enough to catch the skinny beam of light poking through my closet door. It looked sharp. I flicked the back of my thumbnail against the cutting edge, and it came away ticked where it had connected. I shaved off a bit of one of my shoelaces. It was sharp. Sharp enough for chopping wood, sharp enough for splicing scalps. I jumped when there was a knock at the door of my room. I fumbled for my more familiar hammer, but deliberately knuckles rapped against the door. Shave and a haircut, they pounded. 2 bits. I pounded back. No scratching, no rasping, no moaning. The coast is clear. Our secret code could only be performed by humans. I popped to my feet and leapt out of the closet and into Dad's arms. "My goodness, little bean," he said, quietly exasperated. I smoothed my braids back against my head and straightened my shirt. "No," I said, standing up taller. "You said I'm not little anymore." "Fair enough, big bean," he smiled. "Dinner's ready. Come on downstairs." "Okay." I clipped the safety leather back onto my axe before tucking it into my belt. He tilted his head and considered me. I stood up as tall as I could. Was he happy or sad? His boots shifted heavily on the floor. He nodded his chin at the door of what would soon be our group bedroom. "How am I going to keep this place warm in the winter?" he asked me, rubbing his chin. "I'm going to have to make some kind of stove with some kind of chimney, maybe a wide pipe headed out that window." "You'll figure it out," I said. "I'll help." "I have no doubt." He linked my wrist to his elbow and walked with me downstairs. I let my feet punch the floor like Dad's boots. "Yeesh," Mom put her hand up to quiet me. "You'll wake the dead." I quieted myself. Mom was right. With such a huge windows in the living room, we would have to be very careful. It was a perfect access point for monsters to bang their way in if we attracted them. We should settle ourselves and have a quiet dinner before it grew dark and our kerosene lamps draw them to us. The golden light of a late spring day poured in through my giant panes, watching the shiny steel of our propane burner. My new axe handle clattered gently against the floor with the familiar scrape of my hammer's handle as I sat cross-legged in place in the circle. The single burner sat perched atop a tiny can of dented propane. Mom balanced our blackened sauce pot on top, the noodles inside shimmering and almost finished. "What are we having?" I asked, my stomach growling. Hector and Juliet perched on their hands and knees as close as they dared without being scolded or scalded, one on either side of me peering into the hot bubbles. Dad leaned back on his elbows, stretching his legs along the solid planks. "Noodles with sweet peas and the last of our bacon grease," said Mom, "to celebrate our new home. Ophelia, could you please go get the bowls?" She pointed to our new kitchen cabinets. The huge new cabinets were sparsely dotted with our things. Dad had carried in the contents of our trunk, tarps and his toolbox in one cabinet, food in the one next door, 2 cans of corn sat next to 3 cans of red beans, a jar of pickles and a small plastic bag of rice that was almost opaque with the wrinkles of reuse. The paper-wrapped block of flour was protected from mice by an old coffee can, starting to rust around the edges. Dad said that coffee was like tea, but better, stronger, darker. He said that he would get us coffee someday. I licked my lips. Today, Ophelia, please, Mom called. The noodles will get soggy. I grabbed all but one of our 6 aluminum bowls, leaving Imogen's, and all 3 of our spoons, one short. Dad whittled chopsticks to make up for a lack of silverware, and I preferred them to the rough, pitted, and scratched fake silver pieces, especially for noodles. I handed out the dishes accordingly, one in front of each of us, marking our seat in a pretzel-style moon. Mom ladled noodles and the canned peas into our bowls, each with a spoonful of bacon grease and cracklings smeared on top. Her spoon clanked empty against the glass jar before she got to her own bowl. Her noodles would only be coated in peas juice and hot water, but she wouldn't say a thing about it. I scooped half of my bacon grease into her bowl when she looked away to turn off the burner and secure the propane tank. The drifting steam reminded us to let the pasta cool before we picked up our thin metal bowls. Only Hector regularly forgot and burned his fingers and tongues, almost nightly. Yeesh, Mom sighed, scooping him into her lap, telling him again, blow on it first. When we were finished and too full and lazy to hold ourselves up, we lay across each other on the wooden boards, basking in our new space, even me. Mom leaned a bent knee against Dad as she squeaked the dishes clean with her fingers in the leftover noodle water. Juliet nuzzled her chin into the crook of my elbow while I wound her hair between my fingers. Hector sprawled akimbo, just as mellow as the rest of us, but not quite touching anyone. I could barely keep my eyes open. It was a relief when Dad stood, wrapped Mom in his arms with a kiss, and announced, "Come on, let's all go to bed." My feet were heavy on the stairs, but I remembered to skip the squeaky 6th step. I lingered in the doorway to my new room, gazing at my space through heavy lids. The blue was creamy and purple in the near darkness. "Come on," Dad said. "Bedtime. You can explore more tomorrow." I was too tired to ask if we had barricaded the lower doors, if the lantern was all of the way out, or if I should sit awake at the window, a sentry over the yard, to see if any stumblers stalked towards us during the night. In the large duckweed bedroom, Dad had carried all of our blankets and clothes into a pile in one corner. Mom spread 2 thick wool blankets on the floor, one for her and one for Dad, the other for Hector, Juliet, and myself. She rolled and placed one of each of our sweaters near the top for a pillow, and gently smoothed down a second wool blanket on top, ready for us to crawl beneath. I flopped myself down with my head on my sweater and patted a soft place near my shoulder for Juliet. She snuggled into place, tucking one of her feet into my denim pockets, just as she always did. Hector stood with his back to us at the window, where he was gazing out at the giant twilit yard. His fingers splayed at the first twinkling stars, leaving prints on the glass. If he saw a zombie, he probably wouldn't even wake us up to tell us about it. Mom sighed and folded the small, ratty extra blanket around his feet so that when he slid down to sleep, at least he wouldn't be directly on the floor. He had always preferred the footwell of the car to the seats as well. Mom kissed each of us on the peaks of our ears and petted our cheeks with her fingers before giving the bedroom door one last check. Despite ourselves, without any surrounding iron bars against our best guarded instincts, Dad let out a deep rumble of exhaustion, and we all fell soundly asleep. I didn't break a chapter there, but my throat's getting dry. I want to drink more coffee. So I'm going to break there anyway. Put in a civilized bookmark, but then bend the page anyway to show myself where I left off. Thanks for having story time with me. It's definitely something that I need right now in the world, is someone reading to me. Sorry I wrote such long chapters that I never really examined until now. Thanks for joining us in The House of Ophelia Moon, the words that I can give away to you because I wrote them. So I hope you have a great, cozy day, and I'm going to go do some other chores that are not as fun as reading aloud. And hopefully we'll all be back for a story time in the near future.